Welcome to our AI forum. And today's topic is around FDA and approvals for FDA and all the frameworks around that. So we're really excited to welcome Alex Cadotte, who is at MCRA. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Alex, when you start your talk. And then next up will be Nima, and I don't want to butcher your name, so I'll let you introduce
And-
yourself then too. Thank you so much.
and-
This is a really great topic, and we're really excited to have you here.
Indeed, actually, Nan, I was able to join. I apologize. It didn't work out logistics wise, but thanks, Nan, and thanks, Alex, for doing this. I really appreciate it. I had the nice opportunity to meet with Alex at a recent Kellogg Business of Healthcare. I was really impressed with a lot of things he was saying. A reformed academic, spent a bunch of years at the FDA. So thanks to Alex for doing this. We look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Sounds good. Thanks for the invitation, Abel, and we'll do our best to kind of educate folks on FDA and the AI machine learning space. So hi, everyone. My name's Alex Cadotte. I'm the Senior Director for Digital Health and Radiology at MCRA, which is basically a clinical research organization, or CRO, and I'm part of the advisory side of things. One thing that might be important here is, how did I get to where I am? I have a PhD in biomedical engineering, and then a little bit of neuroscience in there. And I worked in the neurospace, the neuromedical device space, for a number of years. And then after doing that for a couple of years, I ended up going to FDA in about 2015. And basically, during the time that I was there, I brought a lot of skills related to software and what eventually became digital health with me. So I naturally kind of gravitated towards those teams. And also, the team that I was a reviewer for in radiology happened to be where 90% of the AI devices were coming into FDA. So, I was the lead reviewer for probably more than 100 AI machine learning based devices as they came into FDA, and managed a bunch of them also as the team lead for imaging software. During that time that I was there, I worked for digital health for a while. I worked on a bunch of policy related to things like predetermined change control plan for AI machine learning, and FDA's AI machine learning action plan. So I was kind of right in the thick of it with FDA and the policy that I was working on. In 2021, I decided to move on to industry, and that's where I started with MCRA. The unique thing about MCRA is there's a lot of us ex-FDA folks that work at MCRA and basically provide our insight into FDA as a consultant. So that's essentially what I do now. I manage a team, including Nima here, that provides services to basically our clients who are trying to get medical devices. A lot of startups actually that are working on devices, trying to get them ready to be deployed out into the world. And we provide a lot of services that help not only from an advisory perspective, but we also provide a lot of AI machine learning support through our AI and Imaging Center, which Nima is the director of. So Nima, why don't you just introduce yourself real quick? And when you're done with your introduction, turn it back to me so I can start the presentation.
Thank you, Alex. Nima Akhlaghi. I'm Associate Director as part of Digital Health and Radiology and Imaging Group at MCRA, as Alex mentioned. So I have a similar kind of path. So I have a PhD in electrical and computer engineering, and then my whole background was focused on medical imaging, in particular ultrasound, and combined with what back then we called as a data mining, or kind of AI ML initially, starting of the AI and ML enabled devices build up. So right after my PhD, I joined FDA. Initially, I was part of the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratory, which is a small research organization within the FDA that just keeps the entire center of devices updated to the new technologies and development. So I served as other research organization as a principal investigators on a lot of research studies in the digital health and imaging areas. And then lately, I joined the radiological health. So I moved from the research department or research center, part of the Center of Devices at the FDA, to more of the regulatory part, and then served as a lead reviewer as part of the same exact team that Alex used to work. And I've been the reviewer, so I serve as a lead reviewer on a lot of submissions on, again, based on the imaging devices, and a lot of, as we call them, as in digital health or AI/ML enabled devices, starting from simple functionality to really complex detection diagnostic tools. So throughout the entire time at the FDA, I was also served as a member to our AI and imaging working team at the FDA that basically comes with the policies and the current thinking of the FDA about these things. And also I was trained at the FDA as one of the experts on the study design and protocol evaluation. And these are some of the values that we're bringing here at MCRA, that when we talk and work with the client, as Alex mentioned, we have a lot of insights, and we know how to navigate and put things together in the way that FDA expecting to see things. So, and here at MCRA, my day-to-day job, I'm working with a lot of clients, helping them throughout their, study design, protocol development, and all the services that Alex just listed here. So I'll keep it here, so I don't want to take too much time.
Thanks, Nima. I've got a lot that I'm going to try to cover here. Nima and I are using some presentations that we've used before, but we've already done introductions. And just to kind of talk about MCRA, at least superficially speaking, as a CRO, we cover basically everything that a company would need in order to get to the market. So there's a lot of strategy that we provide, as well as services that are involved with that. But I just wanted to kind of cover some of the general ideas here, that a lot of times companies are interested in how much they're going to be reimbursed by some of our systems. So like there's a reimbursement strategy. Once you have your reimbursement strategy put together and you're designing your device, there's your regulatory strategy, finding a place for it to fit in with FDA. And hopefully you get through FDA. And then once you make it out to the market, then you're more subject to those reimbursement strategies. But there are a lot, really the purpose of this slide is to kind of demonstrate that there's a lot to consider when you're moving kind of from the lab environment and you're actually trying to start moving into a medical device space. A lot of the things like HIPAA, GDPR in the EU, cybersecurity is a big focus for FDA these days. So these are all things that are things that you'd have to consider if you are kind of creating a medical device of some sort and eventually trying to get that to the market. Getting to a little bit more of what our objectives here are today. Typically, we give this slide deck to basically startup consortiums or accelerators. So I'm going to be stopping about halfway through this presentation. One thing I wanted to note to folks is I will be sharing the slides, and there's a lot of kind of written material on some of the slides after where I'll stop that may be useful for you if you're a little bit more interested in FDA and understanding where, if you're working as maybe as part of a startup or have an idea that you wanted to move into to the regulated medical device space, there's some good information there. So not going to cover it today, but just wanted to let you know it's there if you wanted to take a look at it. So what we're going to do with Regulatory 101 is help you figure out whether your device or technology is regulated by FDA, and then kind of getting into what type of testing you need to perform to gain FDA clearance. And then we're going to transition to Nima, who's going to give a little bit more depth on what that testing would look like. So one of the places that we like to start from a regulatory perspective is, well, by the law, what is the definition of a medical device? There's a lot here, but probably the most important piece that I'm going to highlight here is this idea that it's intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals. So a mistake a lot of people make when they read this is like, oh, well, my medical device doesn't diagnose the patient. It just provides helpful information to help the radiologist interpret a radiograph, for example. It's like, well, actually, that's what FDA means here when they talk about diagnosis of disease. So I just want to point out here that it's a pretty broad umbrella what a medical device is. And really what it is anything that interacts essentially with people that has an intended use from a medical device perspective. So that also is kind of a term in my next slide here. an intended use versus an indications for use. A lot of times people use these terms interchangeably, but I just want to mention here that everything about FDA and the way that they regulate medical devices is about intended use. And it's really getting into the brass tacks of what with your indications for use. What type of patients does your device useful for? Who's the user for your device? What's the environment that it's going to be used in? Is it supposed to be used in an ambulance, a hospital, at home? And then you kind of start getting into the anatomy and the disease. So I just want to be really clear that it's more than just the technology that you're developing, including the AI. When you're putting together an indications for use statement and you're considering intended use, which FDA considers to be a really broad concept of, the labeling, which is all your marketing and advertising materials and the way that you talk about your device. FDA evaluates the way you talk about your device versus what it actually does. And if they don't match up, there's a problem. So just to get a little bit deeper into that idea of indications for use, if you have a technology that you're developing and you're working on, you need to be thinking about who's going to be using your device. Is it a radiologist? Is it a home user? If you're talking about an app for your Apple Watch or some other platform, is it just basically the entire population of the US? Is it children? Is it adults? What disease are you looking at? You may not be looking at a specific disease. You may be providing information that could relate to a specific disease. You also have to think a lot about how you intend or expect your product to be used. And kind of the opposite of that is, how do you expect your device might be misused? Because that's a big part of what FDA looks at when they're reviewing your device. How do you intend, what are the outputs from your device? How do you want those outputs to use? What are the situations where it could be used inappropriately or the wrong way? And I think I already kind of covered this idea of whether it's with directly to patients or whether this is a device that would be used by a physician. So the really key point here is you have to go through this exercise of drafting and indications for use, because you have to account for all of these things in your medical device submission to FDA, because if you can't nail this down, the rest of your submission is going to be pretty challenging because FDA expects you to talk about all those things. So one of the first things you might encounter when you think about FDA is FDA classifies your device. These categories, kind of from left to right here, are kind of low risk to high risk. Generally speaking, you don't classify your device, FDA classifies your device. And that's when FDA classifies your device, it's binding. But it's a good idea to understand where you might fit in. And this is where regulatory strategy starts to come into talking about how you might get your AI machine learning device to the market. Class 1 are generally devices that FDA allows you to just register and list, which basically sets you up to be inspected by FDA, but you don't necessarily have to do a pre-market notification process, meaning a submission to FDA, which you'll hear terms, FDA jargon like 510K, de novo, PMA. Those are all pre-market submissions. Class 2 devices, once those have been classified, those are generally the ones that you can use as a predicate and basically tell FDA, hey, this 510K device, our device is basically the same as what this company did. That's usually the highest volume way devices get to market. Ironically enough, with AI machine learning, and that's part of why the US regulatory system is a bit challenging sometimes, is because you may have a really amazing technology and you may be able to do a 510K for it, but you have to spend a good amount of your time during the 510K for your innovative device explaining to FDA why it's the same as something somebody else did. So that's kind of the regulatory mechanism for class 2 devices. Class 3 devices, generally speaking, is when you're talking about what FDA calls a PMA. Those are much larger, in-depth submissions. This is usually for things that FDA has never seen before, or that there's risks that FDA hasn't seen before. There are some kind of nuances about the types of submissions in between, like a de novo with the classification process at FDA. I don't really have time to get into that today. If you ever wanted to have a conversation about this for your medical device, I would suggest reaching out. So kind of the next step to this is, does your product include software? And this kind of goes back to the classification a little bit here. But there are all sorts of things in medical devices today that govern different functions, like administrative functions. FDA's carved out things that are considered medical devices, but are like general wellness. You know, a great example again is your Apple Watch has a lot of functions on it that are intended for general wellness, but it does also include atrial fibrillation detection, which FDA has said that is a medical device. So there's actually a mix of those two here. Some things that are not regulated by FDA and some things that are. Probably what you need to understand is that one of the first things that you need to understand with your AI machine learning device is where you might fit in on this continuum at the bottom of the slide. Is my medical device perhaps not regulated by FDA? Has FDA said general wellness or low risk devices? Am I in this gray area in between? Then there's also a layer here where FDA wants you to register and list, but they don't necessarily need you to come in with a pre-market submission. That's kind of that class 1 bucket that I was talking about. And then there are a lot of devices like, for example, the atrial fibrillation on your Apple Watch, or medical devices that detect or put a little box around nodules for lung cancer on a radiology image. Those are devices that are the focus of FDA oversight. So this is kind of just a general idea here of where you fit into things. You know, a lot of companies, they want to stay on this side of the line, outside of that gray area, and not be regulated. Some companies want to be regulated because one of the things that's often a rule of thumb is that if you're the focus of FDA oversight, there's a good chance that there's reimbursement waiting for you on the other side of this equation. So sometimes it's not always good to be not regulated by FDA, I think, is my message there. Because if you're not regulated by FDA, it may mean that nobody would pay for what you're offering. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So kind of moving on a little quickly here, where you would normally start for this regulatory strategy and figuring out where you are on that continuum. FDA has a number of databases up on its website for PMAs, 510Ks, de novos, that you'd be able to use to figure out if somebody's done something similar to what you've done, and give you some information about, you know, what type of clinical testing do I need to do to satisfy FDA and basically get my device to market. So these databases are something that we use extensively for regulatory strategy, even when we are inside FDA. Once you go through this process, there's times when you're not sure where FDA would classify your device. There is a mechanism out there called a 513G that the only purpose of it is for FDA to give you an answer of, you know, am I regulated? Am I not regulated? Do I have to do a certain type of submission? These are generally not recommended. It's better to interact with FDA kind of face to face rather than through a submission to answer these questions. But just pointing this out, that there is a mechanism by which FDA can help you figure out where your device fits in. Generally speaking, I would highly suggest you talk to somebody like myself, or just basically talk directly to the FDA if you have that ability to do so. So if you are developing a device, you know, where do you imagine that your device would kind of fit in? You know, is it even regulated by FDA? And if it is regulated, would it fit under class 1, 2, or 3? Again, you know, if you're kind of moving into the medical device space, one of the services that we offer is basically establishing that regulatory strategy and answering those questions as if we still worked at FDA. So that's oftentimes the value of a regulatory consultant, is pointing you in the right direction so that you know specifically, with my next slide, what your pre-market requirements are. And, you know, this is going to be fairly high level, but the type of evidence, scientific evidence, that FDA would need as part of your regulatory submission can be very broad, depending on what your device does. You know, if it's a physical device, there, you know, you can look back through some of those databases that I had mentioned previously and figure out what other companies had to do to get their device on the market through the summaries that FDA has of those 510Ks, de novos, and PMAs. And, you know, that evidence that you have to provide, you know, there's all sorts of benchtop verification and validation. Software is a big area for us in terms of, you know, that's where I got my start in FDA, was reviewing software documentation. There's a very specific way that FDA expects software to be recorded, validated as part of your quality system. What you'll find out as a software engineer someday, if you're entering into the medical device space, is that for every hour that you spend developing a medical device, you're going to spend 3 hours creating FDA documentation about what you did. So that's probably one of the big differentiators there. Cybersecurity is a big area for FDA right now. A lot of recent legislation as well as guidance is released by FDA because this is an area of where FDA is kind of catching up, and they're actually being very hard on industry in this space right now. So if your device has software, firmware of any kind, you are subject to cybersecurity regulations. Then there's other types of testing like biocompatibility, sterilization, packaging, electrical safety, electromagnetic compatibility, wireless performance, human factors, usability, and clinical validation, which is basically the clinical study that shows that your device does what you say it does. So a lot of times what you're asking is at this point is, what evidence do I need? And it's really answering a lot of these questions. You know, does my device include hardware, AI machine learning? Does it include off-the-shelf components, software that you're integrating into your device that doesn't belong to you, that you have to account for from a risk management perspective? Am I developing my own software? Am I documenting it properly? Does my device make physical contact? Do I need to examine risks about basically what the device is made of and how it interacts with the human body? Does my device need to be sterile when it's used? Does it share information? Does it have wireless connectivity? And also questions like, does my product connect to other medical devices? So generally speaking, you know, when you're performing this testing, a question that might come up is, do I need an IDE from FDA, which is an investigational device exemption? It basically means that you can distribute your device to the places where you are doing your clinical research. For significant risk studies where you're talking about things like an implantable device or certain things like that, FDA expects to review your testing before you're going to subject patients to those risks. A lot of digital health devices don't actually make contact with the patient. You know, a lot of times they're diagnostic, and your study can be done on retrospective data. So just pointing out that a lot of times, you know, that's one of the convenient things about AI machine learning devices, especially in the diagnostic space, is that an IDE isn't necessarily required. So that's something that I'm not going to be able to get into a lot of depth. And this is my last slide before we switch over to Nima. We'll talk a little bit more about specifically AI machine learning devices, but I just wanted to quickly go through here. There's a document out there, which is basically, if you did a Google search on FDA's 10 guiding principles for AI machine learning devices, there's a lot of expectations that FDA has for how you're doing your testing. The ones that I'm going to focus on here that are kind of the hot topics these days. Number 3 here, clinical study participants and data sets are representative of the intended patient population. If you're not concerned about health equity, FDA will force you to be concerned about health equity. If your data set is run, if you're collecting at major academic institutions, it's likely you may not be collecting a diverse data set that represents the entire US population. FDA will push back on your data set if you don't have representation of all Americans in a device that you want to distribute to all Americans. Another thing to be aware of is things like data sets. Your training data for your AI machine learning device needs to be completely independent of the test data. And, you know, also the sites that you collect data from for your testing should be independent from the sites that you collect data for your training. This is to ensure that you don't have bias in your algorithm based on your training data. Because if you validate your device on the same data that you use to train it, you're always going to get a good answer from how well your device performs. So it's really about making sure your device performs for everybody. Another area where people get tripped up is number 5. Basically, you have to establish a reference standard. And a lot of times where people get hung up also is FDA insists that, like, if you're evaluating a radiograph or an ECG, you need someone like a US board certified radiologist or a cardiologist signing off on the ground truth for that material that you're using for your training as well as for your validation. If you're just using techs or people in your own lab that aren't certified to basically deliver medical care, FDA is going to force you to go back to the drawing board and establish your ground truth to the best that's available, not the cheapest. One thing the last one that I'll focus on here is number 7. FDA does place a lot of value on the performance of the human AI team. They're not really big on devices that replace physicians at this point, because most of the devices cleared by FDA, like 99% of them, are intended to aid the clinician. So it's also really important for you to understand how you're fitting into that workflow. But anyway, I encourage you to go to this document that's out there. It's published by FDA, Health Canada, and the UK health system to basically outline what are the best practices. And it does have a little bit more depth on each one of these. But this is a great place to start to make sure that you're thinking about the right things, to make sure that FDA doesn't say, stop, try again. With that, I'll turn things over to Nima.
Sure. Alex, before I move forward, there are some questions on, do you want to answer those questions right now, or should we answer
Are they in the chat?
Yes.
I'm not seeing them. Oh, quick Q&A. There we go.
For you. We can read them to make sure that everyone listening hears them too. So the first one, there's a question. As you have a background in medical imaging, what are your thoughts on the potential role of AI in these 4 phases of medical imaging? And the 4 phases are image acquisition, post-processing, pathology detection, and treatment. Do you see a framework that could possibly involve a progressive unlocking of the role an AI plays?
So I can tell you just from the devices that I've reviewed at FDA that there are already devices, AI machine learning devices cleared that basically accomplish each of these 4 steps. There's some involved in AI image acquisition, like reconstruction algorithms. And there's others like, well, actually that's more post-processing, but image acquisition and post-processing, a lot of times they occur both right on the machine that you're doing the acquisition with. Sometimes they're in the cloud, sometimes they might be local. A lot of times those happen together. Pathology detection, that's a lot of times where we're talking about that relationship between the device and the human. And then for treatment, there's all sorts of situations where AI is being used, a lot of times for surgical planning, surgical navigation, assessment of basically the effectiveness of a treatment. So at least from my perspective, I feel like there's already AI devices at each one of these steps based on their intended uses. They don't always work together though. So I feel like there's, maybe more work to be done as far as stitching those together, but I think that's about as good of an answer as I can provide for that right now.
Great, thank you. It looks like there's a follow-up question to that. What are the guardrails that the FDA puts in place to ensure that this is used to ADI and not replace, to aid and not replace the human, as you mentioned earlier?
So a lot of FDA's regulations that I was talking about, and that process where you have to find a predicate, most of those devices, if not all of those devices, do not replace the human. So if you came in with a device that did replace the human and you said that pretty much we don't need a human as part of this loop, probably the first thing that you hear from FDA is this predicate's not going to work because a human is involved in the loop. This is a new risk and a new intended use, and they would immediately point you from kind of that easier 510K process to the PMA process. And the PMA process would be the mechanism by which you would have your device reviewed. Along with that, they're also going to give you an idea of what a lot of that testing would be that you would need to do in order to basically replace a human. And anytime I've seen this happen when I was at the agency and with clients that are pursuing that sort of thing, the bar is a lot higher than you would think it would be. So that's generally how FDA handles a situation where you're going to try to replace a human. They're basically going to turn around and ask you, show me that this can work without the human. So it's, they're evidence-based, but to date, I haven't seen anyone except for one submission, which is the IDXDR device, actually replace a human in their intended use.
So just can I add something to that, Alex?
Sure.
So I mean, basically, the current FDA's thought process is that so you can develop AI tools that even can help with the detection and diagnosis, but that's not going to be the only source of data that someone's going to rely or the medical team is going to rely on for that final decision-making processes on the treatments or diagnosis. So usually what we call, and we have, FDA has a specific definition of fully autonomous AI tools versus a semi-autonomous. So most of the devices that so far, and Alex mentioned that, so when cleared are kind of falls under semi-automatic. So you can do everything with your AI, but at the end of the loop or somewhere in the loop, there is a human being that needs to agree or disagree with your output. And that human being is the one that pushes the final decision-making or decisions to the patient's record. So, and as Alex mentioned, if you want to move toward more autonomous, the bar is really high.
So I do see the other questions here, and since I don't want to stop Nima from giving his talk, I think I can answer these in the chat, if that's all right, because I think there's a mechanism here.
Alex,
Sounds great. Thank you.
Sharing so I can share.
Yeah.
Okay.
And before I go off camera here, just feel free to send stuff in the chat, and I'll try to focus on answering if I can.
Mm-hmm. So can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay, great. So, I mean, so Alex was talking a lot about, kind of the regulatory processes. So in my several slides that I have, I'm really going to focus on as what we call it as an AI and ML enabled devices. It's been a terminology that started long back at the FDA, and we're already seeing a lot of developments on it. So my focus would be mostly on those type of devices, which is in most part they could be a combination of hardware and software, but for majority of them are really software, what we call them as a software as a medical devices. Just to give you a little idea about it, so if you think about all the human conditions that are out there, that some reports show that there are more than 10,000. So there is a momentum in the industry that they're trying to basically develop tools or AI, in particular AI and ML basic tools that they can assess these human conditions. And this momentum is growing every day and every day. And this is really, we can see that momentum based on the FDA's database. So the graph that I'm showing on here is just basically the number of devices that has been cleared since these topics generated or started at the FDA, or basically the beginning of data mining or AI ML enabled devices. And you can see that the momentum was pretty high to the point that for the last 25 years, FDA has cleared more than 600 of these type of devices, mostly software as a medical devices that each of them they're taking, or the intended use are some sort of assessment of a human condition. Just only looking at 2022 and 2023, there were more than 160 of these approvals. Most of these approvals, as I mentioned, and I think Alex, based on what Alex explained throughout the regulatory processes. So you can imagine some of these devices at the beginning, from FDA's perspective, count as a class 3, and then there were a history of back and forth communications with the FDAs and the clients till the moment that FDA started considering most of these devices as class 2, that they fall under what we call as a 510K devices. So basically, it's a Me Too device. You find a device that has similar intended use out there, and you're showing that your device is similar to that, and just to go through the processes. So if you want to look at a little more in depth of these cleared devices so far by the FDA, based on the type of devices from regulatory perspective and also the anatomy, and this is something that the graphs I'm showing is assessment that's done by American College of Radiology. You can see that these devices fall under a variety of different anatomical sites and different type of applications, clinical application. A lot of applications start and happens, and a lot of clear devices on for brains, things like stroke, on the breast, like assessment of masses, or assessing the cancers. On the lung, there are a lot of submissions and devices cleared on the lung for detection of lung nodules, and also some diagnosing the lung nodules from the perspective whether or not it's benign or whether or not, say, it's a malignant. and chest. So there are a lot of devices of heart that evaluates cardiovascular. These tools, involve things like, segmentation of the arteries, finding the plaque, characterizing the plaque, and so on and so forth. On the spine, on the other hand, so we have a lot of devices so far that, as Alex mentioned, usually meant for pre-surgical planning. So a lot of segmentation of the bones, measurement tools, and pre-surgical planning and such. So as you can see, these whole area of AI and ML clear devices is pretty broad. And there are new areas and new fields and new tools that every day are adding to it. So our day-to-day job, we're working with a variety of clients in a diverse, fields that every day, I have days that I start from a device that looks at the brain images, and all the way I'm finishing my day with a device that look at some feet, bones, and assessment of that. So it's pretty broad, and the momentum is there. And we're expecting to see this growth as go upper and upper every day. So for most part, also now, if you're going to look at from the FDA's category perspective, so there are some definition of devices when it comes to the radiology in particular. Some we call them as MEMS, or some of them falls under what we call them as a quantitative imaging tool. These quantitative imaging tools, as also Alec mentioned, these are tools that helps the users in assessing patients' condition. Most of the quantitative imaging and MEMS tools are basic tools that provides basic tools for measurements and assessing. Usually they focus on, if it's, AI-based or AI/ML-based tools from the quantitative imaging perspective are focusing on an anatomical structures assessment. But if it's AI/ML tool that helps with the diagnosis, there's always a human being in the loop. But there are also other categories of devices that falls under, AI/ML enabled tool from the radiology perspective, like CAT-T. These are what we call them as computer-aided triage devices that basically the whole point is that they're going to assess patient data and say if the patient is suspicious for a particular condition or not. They're not going to provide any detection, diagnosis, or anything. This is usually, these devices send a notification that this patient is suspicious for so-and-so condition. And then, of course, we are falling into the field of computer-aided detection, or CAD-E devices, or CAD-X, which is computer-aided diagnosis or computer-aided detection diagnosis. So as you can go, if we go from up down, so basically the FDA's requirements are growing and growing. So when you are in the quantitative imaging or CAD-T devices, usually the bar is like, okay, show me that the output of your device is accurate enough to meet the intended use that you're claiming of. When you go into the detection and diagnosis, now the bars goes higher. So now from the detection and diagnosis perspective, now you have to show if your device out is going to help with detection, let's say, of an abnormality, or diagnosis of an abnormality, let's say a nodule is benign versus cancerous, then you have to show not only that your output is accurate, but also you have to show that those outputs can improve the performance of intended users, which is, it could be radiologists, could be medical team, or so on. So again, it's a pretty broad area, and it's been growing every day, and we are seeing a lot of new devices, new development that's coming in and communicating. I can tell you, so when I was at the FDA, so back in 2018, 2019, we had a lot of these early on devices, and the FDA was a lot of back and forth and internal discussions on how we should treat them, what should be our a standard expectation, till the moment that they put together that and the letter that Alice was showing on the best practice on AI imaging. So these days, FDA is also getting more mature about these technologies and reacting more logically about all of this. So now, thinking about any of these type of devices that I mentioned, it could be quantitative imaging, computer-aided triage, detection and diagnosis. There are some sort of testing, performance testing is always needed and required. So, and that's one of the key components of any submission that goes to the FDA. So the way that we are thinking about it, and the way that FDA is going to look at these things, there is a life cycle to these studies. Basically, as you define your technology and you develop the technology, the first things that you have to think of, as Alex mentioned, is the intended use. So what is the intended use of your device? What your device is going to do? And then what type of claims are you making? So are you saying, oh, my tool is only measuring, I don't know, so-and-so anatomical structure, or no, actually I'm detecting or diagnosing an abnormality? depending on the type of claims and intended use you have different type of, you require different type of study. And I will go through the type of studies that usually we are working for this type of devices in the day-to-day job. But usually when you want to think about the study lifecycle, it always starts from the study design and developing the study protocol. And really, the study designs usually should focus in a manner that you have to define an endpoint that really targets your primary intended use. And then you have to demonstrate how, through that study, how your device can meet or exceed the performance requirements to show that you're actually meeting the intended use. This is the whole point. So usually when our client comes to us, that's the first step. So that's where the regulatory, and then not only we need to think about it from the perspective of a performance assessment, but also we need to understand it from the regulatory requirement, what type of study is needed, and what are the, and when they define the study type, there are considerations that we need to fit into those study designs. So usually the regulatory team gets involved with the client. We'll learn about their technology, we'll learn about the intended use, the claims they want to make, and we start putting together that study design. Those study design have some key component, like, as I mentioned, the endpoints. What is your primary endpoint? What is your secondary endpoint? What are the acceptance criteria that you're defining for your endpoints? What is the sample size? And also, what is the data characteristics? So because as Alex mentioned, it's really critical from FDA's perspective when it comes to the AI ML devices and generally for any type of devices, that the type of the data that you use for your evaluation, or we call it the final performance evaluation, should be a good representative, should represent your intended patient population, and from that perspective, you should have a diversity from that in that regard. So basically, if you're claiming that your device can detect lung nodules, then FDA's expectation is that you have a diverse intended patient populations and data representative from different gender, different age, different patients with different, clinical conditions and such. So these are some of the key components of those study design. As soon as we have the study design, and one of the expectations from the FDA is that before you run the performance testing, you have to lock your study design for study protocol. You cannot change or you cannot deviate from that study protocol after you design it and lock it. That's why sometimes the clinical application is pretty challenging. The study design is pretty challenging, that during these processes, it's required for us to go and talk to the FDA upfront and just propose what type of study we're thinking of, and make sure that we are kind of in alignment before we just locking the study, executing them, and going to FDA, and FDA says, "Oh, we don't like this." So this is one of, I think I would just say this is one of the key process throughout this life cycle. And of course, the performance testing document is one of the key documents that you have to put as part of your FDA submissions. A lot of the submissions, the decisions that FDA is going to make is going to be around this performance testing and assessment. So that's after you pass that first step of the study design, and you have the study design, you have the study protocol, you know the type of data you're looking for, the subgroups, the sample size, and everything. The next step is, okay, we needed that. As Alex mentioned again, so based on following the best practice, one of the key components is to make sure that you're having the data that's independent from your any training internal testing, and also it's a representative of your intended patient population as you're claiming for. So that's the steps that we start working now with our client, understanding the inclusion and exclusion criteria, the characteristic of the data, demographics they need. And then we see if sometimes they have the data because they're working with a clinical institute, sometimes they don't. So we help them to collect data at hospitals, or we go to data banks and try to gain some data that is going to be really representative for what they're trying to do and for good for their study. So after we have the data, now the next step would be, okay, now we need to engage with experts, because for most of the studies that I'm going to walk you through, that we usually engage with experts. It could be radiologists, could be cardiologists, depending on the application. And FDA's bars is really high. So as Alex mentioned again, so you cannot just go and use text. So FDA's bar for experts is usually high. So usually they're thinking about, US board certified doctors, radiologists, cardiologists, neurologists, and so on and so forth. And then one of the, so that's when we move to the operation side. We define the type of experts we need, we train them, and then we go through the processes and through the study execution till the moment that we have all the results. Then our statistician team, our statistical team just gets engaged. They just process the result based on the methods that we define on the study protocol and study design, and generate that report that goes as part of the FDA submission. So there are some processes that when it comes to the study, some of them is, so one of the key components for most of the studies that we have, what we call is the truthing. It's really the processes that you're going to establish a standard, is a reference standard so you can compare against. So this is one of the key components. And then that's usually a part that it applies to the type of studies that you're going to do, whether or not it's a standalone testing or MRMC. So just moving a little bit and talking about studies again, most of the studies that we're talking here for, particularly for AI ML tools and software as medical devices, because these are not really direct, they don't have a direct impact on the patient. It's not like a physical implant that you put on the patient and then you assess. These are like softwares and AI tools that are going to help with the, evaluation of the patient data, or providing some additional information that helps with the decision-making processes on diagnosis and detection. Because of that, so for most part, there is no direct impact of these of these studies on the patient, and that's what they fall on, what we call them as the retrospective studies. There are two key types of the retrospective studies that usually FDA expects, depending on the regulations you fall under. If it's just quantitative imaging, as I mentioned, or computer-aided triage, the bar is lower. You only need to do what we call it as standalone testing. If you're claiming for things like detection and diagnostic, then you fall under a higher bar of FDA, and then not only you need to provide standalone testing, but also you need to provide the type of testing that we call as a multi-reader, multi-case, or multi-center studies. And for both of these two studies, usually you have to establish that ground truth. So what is the ground truth establishment? I think with any other AI/ML tool out there or software development, so this is really a process in which you're going to establish the reference standard that you can compare against. So when it comes to FDA and this type of medical devices, so the reference standards from FDA's perspective needs to be established based on the current standard of care and gold standard, basically methods that's been used in the standard of care. And that's why when it comes to the gold standard, the FDA's bar is really high. They're always looking for experts, US board doctors, and so on and so forth. But also another piece of information is that when you're establishing this ground truth or the reference standard, because most of the time it's usually done, by engaging, experts and using some manual tools for assessment and establishing the ground truth and the reference standard, there would be a variability across the, different experts. So one expert and decisions compared to another expert might be different depending on the level of expertise they have and the way that they're assessing and such. So there is an intervariability between these truthers that FDA is always expecting you to consider that when you're establishing that that reference standard. And that's why the rule of thumb methods that usually we follow, and that's something that FDA is expecting to see, is where instead of having one person to go through your data and say yes or no or answer your question depending on the application, usually you put together a panel of experts, and the reference standard at the end will be established based on the majority vote. So usually, let's say if it's a CT of brain CT, and the question is whether or not the patient has stroke or not, or ICH. So you assign the data to first two radiologists. They're going to go review it, answer your question. They provide their responses to their question, there are two options, or they are agreed. Which, if they agree, then you already have the majority vote. That's the reference data. If they disagree, then a third person comes into the picture as an educator. That person is going to independently assess, review, provide the opinion, and then again, you're going to see what is the majority vote, and that majority vote is going to establish your reference standard. So this is basically a type of pretty standard techniques that FDA is consider and FDA expects to see to ensure that not only you're considering the intervariability, but also you're following the best standard of the care methods to establish that reference standard as a point of a comparison. So after you have that, so then depending on the regulations and claims and you have in the type of devices you have, there are two different studies. One is a standalone testing. It's a lower bar. Really the intent for this type of testing is to compare your device output or software output against the established reference standard and show what is the performance of your device, and show basically if I'm claiming that I can detect lung nodule with so-and-so sensitivity and specificity throughout this exercise, we want to demonstrate that's actually the case. So usually for this, you first establish the ground truth. Then as part of your method, you define the type of metrics that you want to use as part of a comparison between the ground truth and your output. And then you run it, you have your output, you have the ground truth, you compare it, you go through it, through the results based on the endpoints that you specify as part of your study. And then this is the key point, that your study and the protocol is locked. So you're running this data. This is the first time that your software is seeing that data. It's independent from trainings. You get the data, you're going through to assess and analyze that data based on the statistical analysis you specified in your method. And then you get the results and the comparison. That's it. So if you fail, you fail. And if there is, you can, it's really hard to run the study and then deviate from the study and start just going back and fixing why we deviate and such. So, and this is basically a lower bar. This is usually applies to quantitative imaging and computer-aided triage. The other ones, that's this higher bar, is now where you start claiming about detection or diagnostic of an abnormality. So this is where now FDA wants to see not only your device output is accurate, but also your device output could impact the performance of the intended user. So this is where you need to establish the ground truth. Now, this time you pass the patient data through the readers. You ask the readers to evaluate the patient data without the use of your technology. Then you give them 4 months of washout so they forget about the cases. Now, this time you ask them to evaluate the cases now, this time with the use of your technology. And the whole point of this study, that you have to show that the use of your study can improve the performance of the users, and basically the performance accuracy would be superior to where the readers didn't have access to your basically technology. So basically, you need to show that the performance of aided with the use of your software is superior to unaided. And of course, these studies are pretty lengthy, they are pretty expensive and complex. These are usually the type of study that we prefer to go and discuss the specs and synopsis of the study with the FDA prior to implementing and executing them. So I think I'm going to stop here. So I want to leave some time for questions, but thank you so much for listening.